I. What the demolition permit said. The permit called it a foundation assessment. Pauline had learned in 11 years of salvage work that foundation assessment meant they'd already decided to knock it down and needed someone to say the bones were bad. The building was a former state hospital outside Kalamazoo. 5 stories of pale limestone, each window arched like a held breath. The star-shaped footprint was visible from the road, 5 wings radiating from a central rotunda, and the county historical office had noted this in their file with the phrase, Kirkbride adjacent design, mid-Victorian institutional. Pauline had read that file 3 times on the drive out. She kept stopping on Kirkbride adjacent. Adjacent, not Kirkbride. Something older that Kirkbride had been adjacent to. She arrived on a Tuesday in early March, when the ground was still iron-hard and the sky the color of old pewter. The county liaison, a man named Folger, who wore a vest in weather that required a coat, met her at the gate and handed her a laminated badge. First floor's inaccessible, he said. Flooding issue. Recent flooding? He looked at the badge rather than at her. Historical. You'll use the second floor as your base level. There's a staircase inside the main entrance. She asked what was on the first floor. Fill, he said. Sediment. We think there was a drainage failure sometime in the 1880s. It's been there so long, it's basically structural at this point. He said basically structural the way people say we've looked into it when they haven't looked into it. 2. The letters in the wall. She found the cache on her 4th day, inside a partition wall on the 2nd floor of the east wing. The wall had been opened at some point. She could see the older plaster behind the newer drywall, a renovation seam from perhaps the 1960s. And inside that gap, wrapped in oilcloth that had gone to brown rags, was a bundle of envelopes. Not hidden with any care. Stacked the way you stack things when you're in a hurry and you're not sure you're coming back. 22 letters. The postmarks ranged from 1887 to 1893. The return address was always the same, from WC, 3rd Ward, East Wing, and no street, no city. As if the institution were the only place on earth. The handwriting was a child's, not uneducated, but young. The letters formed with the careful effort of someone who had learned to write recently, and was still proud of the skill. The ink had faded to the color of tobacco, and the paper tasted of iron when she held it too close to her mouth, which she did, without meaning to, reading the 3rd letter in the failing afternoon light. They moved us to the 2nd floor when we arrived. The letter read, "The man with the keys told us the lower rooms were being improved. But I have looked out the window at the side of the building, and the windows 1 floor below us are filled with dirt. Not covered. Filled. The dirt comes right up to the glass on the outside, and you can see it pressed there in layers, dark at the bottom and lighter near the top, the way dirt looks when it has settled after moving a long way very fast." She read that paragraph 4 times. Then she went to the nearest window and looked down. The ground was 6 feet below the sill. She had assumed, without examining the assumption, that this was because the building was elevated on a plinth. There was no plinth. The ground simply stopped 6 feet below what was labeled, on every blueprint she'd been given, as the first floor. What star-shaped buildings were? For there is a thing that happens when you stand at the center of a 5-pointed structure and speak at a certain volume. Pauline had noticed it in the rotunda on her first day, but had not named it. Her voice came back to her not as an echo, but as a continuation, as if the room were still speaking after she'd stopped. She'd assumed acoustics. She'd assumed Victorian theatricality. The boy in the letters, W.C., no other name given anywhere in 22 pages, had described the same phenomenon. Not in the rotunda, in the floors. "When I kneel on the floor in the early morning before the orderlies come," he wrote, "I can feel something moving in it. Not shaking. More like a string that has been plucked a long time ago and has not finished yet. The older woman in the room beside mine, they say she has been here since the place was built. She says it is only the heat pipes. But there are no heat pipes. I have seen the basement entrance, and there is no boiler. The warmth in this place comes from below, and no one will say from where." He wrote about the walls, about how the limestone blocks were not quite square, not the inexact cutting of ordinary masons, but a deliberate rounding of the corners that he could feel with his thumbnail. About how the blocks fit together without mortar in places, resting in channels ground into each other, groove into tongue, the way you'd fit two pieces of a puzzle made for fingers larger than human fingers. He wrote, "I think this building was not built to keep people in. I think it was built to do something else, and we are kept in it now because someone does not want it used for what it was built for." Ivy, the door that opens down. She found it on the 6th day in the West Wing, behind a shelf of patient records that no one had told her was there. The door was not hidden. It was simply ignored, the kind of forgetting that requires effort. The shelf had been placed across it with the specific precision of someone who wanted the door covered, but didn't want to admit to themselves that they were covering a door. She moved the shelf. It took 20 minutes and left her hands striped with rust from the bracket screws. The door was low, about 5 feet, and the hinges were on the top, not the side. It didn't swing. It dropped. There was a recessed handle on the face of it, and when she pulled, the whole door tilted down toward her on a horizontal axis, revealing a shaft and, below the shaft, a steep stair that descended at an angle she associated with ships and cellars. The air that came up was not cold. It was warm, faintly sweet, the way packed earth is sweet when you first break it. Not rot, something older than rot. She had one flashlight and a fully charged phone. She went down. The first floor. The mud had come in through the windows. She could see this clearly because the windows were still there, arched like the ones above, the glass intact in several of them. And behind the glass, a solid wall of brown-gray sediment pressed flat against the panes, as if it had been pushed there by a hand the size of a house. The sediment had not flowed under the door frames. It had come through the windows simultaneously and settled, and in settling it had made a floor of sorts. Smooth, hard-packed, leveling itself the way floodwater levels itself, so that the sediment floor of this buried story was nearly flat, sloping perhaps 2 degrees over the length of the wing. The walls below the sediment line were a different limestone than the walls above. Lighter, more finely dressed. The blocks here were not quite square. Along the baseboards below the sediment, visible only because the sediment had pulled away slightly from the wall in the decades of slow drying, she could see markings, not carved, not painted. More like impressed, the way you'd press a seal into wax. The impressions formed patterns that her eye kept trying to read as letters, kept almost resolving into letters, and then didn't. She photographed everything. Her phone camera made a small sound with each image, and in the silence of the buried floor, each sound was enormous. In the northeast corner, she found furniture, a table, 3 chairs, a ceramic vessel of some kind sealed, which she did not open. On the table, a locket. She should not have picked it up. She was a demolition assessor, not an archaeologist, and she knew the rules. She picked it up. Inside, a photograph. Not a daguerreotype, too clear, too flat. A very early silver print, maybe, or something she didn't have the vocabulary for. It showed a family, 2 adults and 4 children, posed in front of the very building she was standing inside. The building looked as it currently looked from the outside. 5 stories. Arched windows. Star-shaped footprint visible in the gravel of the forecourt. The family was standing in a garden. The garden was where the current ground level was. The adults were standing in the photograph, approximately 6 feet below what Pauline was currently thinking of as the ground. One of the children, second from the left, maybe 11 years old, in a white shirt, was looking not at the camera but slightly to the side, at something outside the frame. His expression was not alarmed. It was the expression of someone listening to a sound that everyone else has stopped hearing. Bahash, Vix. What WC knew. The last letter in the bundle was dated November 1893. The handwriting was different, still careful, but faster now, the pride of the new writer replaced with something that read as urgency even at 130 years of distance. They have told me I do not remember where I came from because I was too young, and the mind protects itself. They have told me the life I described, the round rooms, the lights that came from the walls without fixtures, the buildings that made the air feel tight before rain, is a child's fantasy, compensation for trauma. They are very kind when they say this, and their kindness is the most frightening thing here. But I have found something. In the wall of my room, there is a place where the plaster is not original. It was patched, maybe 30 years ago, maybe more. I worked a piece loose at the corner, and behind it is the original wall surface, and on it is one of the marks I used to know. I used to know what it meant. When I was small, I knew what it meant, and I read it the same way you read a word, without thinking about reading, just receiving. Now I can see it is a mark and know that I knew what it meant, but I cannot make the meaning come. It is like trying to remember a word in a language you've been told you never learned. They are very thorough, whatever they are doing, but they did not get all of it. The marks are still there. The floors still hum if you know where to kneel. And I have put these letters in the wall because someone will find them, I think, and they will feel what I feel, which is not craziness, which is the opposite of craziness, which is the ground is not where they said the ground is. V7. The report she did not file. Pauline came out of the shaft. She put the shelf back. She spent one more day writing the assessment report, which concluded that the building's foundation showed significant compromise and demolition could proceed. She took the locket. She took photographs of the photographs. She kept the letters. That night, in her motel room, she spread everything on the bed and looked at it for a long time. Then she got out her laptop and opened the County Historical Archive and searched for the building's construction records. The records began in 1871. She needed them to begin before 1871. She searched for the parcel. She found a surveyor's map from 1869, 2 years before the state hospital had supposedly been built, and on that map the parcel was already occupied. There was a structure there. The surveyor had labeled it Old Building. Purpose unknown, appears long established. Old Building. 1869. Purpose unknown. She stared at that phrase for a while. Then she searched for orphan train arrival records for Kalamazoo County, 1885 to 1895. There were hundreds of names. She looked for initials WC and found nothing. The records, she noted, were not sparse or fragmentary. They were complete. Complete in the specific way of records that have been completed retroactively. Every name with a place of origin, every child with a birthday, every birthday suspiciously legible, not a smudge or a correction among them. She typed Star Fort floor plan original grade level into her search engine and spent the next 2 hours clicking through things she had seen before and never looked at properly. She typed first floor windows below grade, historical, and the results said, basement window wells, a feature of colonial revival and Federalist architecture. She typed the phrase from the surveyor's map, purpose unknown, appears long established. Just that phrase. Nothing came back. She closed the laptop. She held the locket. She thought about the boy in the photograph who was listening to something outside the frame, and she thought about the feeling she'd had in the rotunda on the first day, her voice continuing after she'd stopped. And she thought about what it means to find the ground is not where they told you the ground was. Then she thought about what it costs to say so. Outside, the Michigan dark pressed flat against the motel window, and the sound of the highway was almost, but not quite, like something continuous, something that had been set going long before the highway was there, and had simply found a new surface to travel through. She kept the locket. She started a second document, separate from the official report, and she titled it Nothing. A document with no name is harder to find than a document with the wrong name. She had learned this working demolition, which is also the work of deciding what to keep. She began. The building was listed as constructed 1871. The surveyor's map from 1869 shows, outside, under 11 years of asphalt, under 6 feet of sediment that had arrived from nowhere one night a century and a half ago and been called a drainage failure ever since, the first floor waited. The glass in its buried windows was still intact. The marks on its walls still meant something. The floor still hummed, very faintly, in a frequency just below what most people have learned to call silence.